There are wars fought over land. There are wars fought over power, over honor, over betrayal. But sometimes a war is fought over something else entirely. Bucket. Yes, a wooden bucket. It was the year 1325, northern Italy, a region known for its scenic hills, fractured politics, and frequent use of swords to solve administrative disputes. This is the story of the War of the Bucket, a brief but very real conflict in which hundreds died over an object typically used for gathering rainwater, or perhaps storing turnips. Italy at the time was less a unified country and more an ongoing group project with no clear leadership. City-states like Bologna, Modena, Florence, and Milan were in constant disagreement, often about important matters, but sometimes not. Two political factions dominated the period, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. If those sound like obscure cheeses, you're not alone. The Guelphs supported the Pope. The Ghibellines supported the Holy Roman Emperor. Neither was particularly tolerant of the other. Modena was a Ghibelline city. Bologna favoured the Guelphs, which is medieval for we hate each other on principle. All they needed was an excuse. They found one in a bucket. By 1325, relations between Bologna and Modena were already strained. And by strained, we mean armed raids, frequent skirmishes, and the occasional stabbing. In short, standard diplomatic practice for the 14th century. Then came the bucket. According to local legend, and please note legend, a group of Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna and stole a wooden bucket. Not a relic, not gold, just a bucket. It was taken from a public well, the kind you draw water from, or possibly wash your feet in. It's unclear whether the bucket was valuable, but the Bolognese were furious. Modena, in response, refused to return it. This could have been the end of the story. It was not, because Bologna decided to escalate the situation by raising an army over a bucket. Bologna mobilized a force of 32,000 men. That is a substantial army by any standard. It is also a curious number of people to retrieve a single household item. Modena responded with a smaller force, around 7,000 men. This made it a classic underdog scenario, except that the cause was astonishingly stupid. The two sides met at Zappolino, a small village with no prior historical significance. It was about to gain some. The battle was not a grand affair. There were no stirring speeches, no epic charges, just confusion, bloodshed, and a lingering sense of embarrassment. Modena won decisively. The Bolognese army collapsed. Many were killed or captured, others fled, all presumably wondering how their lives had led them to this point, a point where their most glorious military moment involved chasing a bucket. Zappolino was not prepared for fame. It received it anyway. The Bolognese forces, though larger, lacked strategic finesse, which is a polite way of saying they charged in like idiots. Modena, meanwhile, held their lines, used the terrain, and refrained from yelling. This turned out to be a winning formula. After the victory, Modena pursued the Bolognese all the way back to the gates of Bologna, but they were not finished. They had one more act of theatre to perform. Right outside the city walls, they built a well. Not a functioning well, just a symbolic one, a decorative hole in the ground with a bucket hanging on it, not the original bucket that remained in Modena. This was a decoy, an artistic statement. The message was clear. We took your bucket, we took your pride, and now we're installing infrastructure. It was perhaps the most passive-aggressive act of medieval warfare on record. Bologna understandably did not take it well. The aftermath was not glorious. For Bologna, it was humiliating. For Modena, it was hilarious. The original bucket, the very item over which the battle was fought, was placed in the town hall, where it remains to this day, on public display, in a glass case, guarded presumably more carefully than it was in 1325. Bologna, meanwhile, attempted to forget the incident. It did not succeed. You cannot lose a war over a bucket and expect people to let it go, especially not Italians. Centuries later, the sting remains. Bologna does not appreciate reminders. Modena, on the other hand, has embraced its role as the bucket thief. With considerable pride, there are worse legacies. You may wonder what Bologna did next. Did they reflect, apologize, attempt to repair relations? No. They complained to the Pope. This was standard practice in the 14th century. Lose a battle, write a strongly worded letter to the Vatican. The Pope offered a few words, some prayers, but no buckets. The Guelphs and Ghibellines continued their conflict, but the War of the Bucket remained unique. Other wars were fought over power, territory, dynastic succession. This one was fought over a wooden container. Historians attempted to dress it up. They spoke of honor, allegiances, papal authority, but none of it changes the fact. This was a war about a bucket. The legacy of the War of the Bucket is not grand. It changed no borders, inspired no treaties, and produced no great poetry, but it did give us a story, a rather ridiculous one. Modena has kept the bucket. It is not a special bucket. It is not ornate. It is not even particularly clean. But it is theirs. Bologna pretends it never happened. We understand. No one wants to be remembered as the city that lost a war over a household item, and yet history remembers. It always does. And yet, here we are. Today, the War of the Bucket serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what can happen when pride, pettiness, and a total lack of perspective collide. Also, a reminder to keep a better eye on your buckets. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't change history. It didn't redefine borders. It didn't lead to revolution or progress or great literature. But it did leave us with a wooden bucket in a glass case and a story so absurd it could only be true. Because after all, people are people. And sometimes people are very, very dumb. Thank you for joining us for this calm, gentle reflection on violence, vanity, and wood-based warfare. Sleep well, and may your buckets remain firmly in your possession.